Madam Moderator, do I need to redo all those things that I just said? Just in case, since it wasn't, because we just started the recording, I'm calling the meeting to order of the California Board of Psychology on November 20th at 10:12 a.m. So I'm going to ask that Mr. Glassbeagle please call the roll to establish quorum.
Go ahead, Mr. Cochran.
Okay. Kasuga? Kasuga? I see you're on here. Maybe it's the mic. So I'll just mark as here. Cervantes?
Here.
Fu?
Here.
Arbsheets?
Here.
Well, nice.
Here.
Phillips?
Here.
Rescate?
Here.
Rogers?
Here.
Tate?
Here.
Okay, quorum is established.
Thank you so much, Ms. McCochran. So the board will now meet in closed session pursuant to Government Code Section 11126A1 to conduct its annual evaluation of its executive officer. So the board will return to closed session for the EO evaluation and will return back into open session upon the conclusion of that. So the board will now enter a closed session. Board members and board staff who are actually just board members, please use the line that was sent to you for the closed session for that effort. The meeting is now in closed session.
Sarah, should we leave the WebEx event?
Yeah, you know, I would say board members go ahead and leave the WebEx event so that we're not accidentally unmuted on the WebEx for that. So I would recommend that board members leave the WebEx.
Okay.
Here. Here. Kasuga. Okay, I'll just repeat again. Kasuga for the recording.
Here.
Cervantes. Cervantes.
Ms. Cervantes will be joining us at 1 p.m. Per previously shared with me.
Okay. Fu.
Hi.
Harbsheets.
Here.
Maestrom.
Here.
Philip.
Here.
Rescate.
Here.
Rogers.
Here.
Tate.
Here.
Okay, quorum is established.
Thank you so much, Ms. McCochran. We're returning back to open session. Thank you all for your patience as we work through closed session items. Before resuming to the agenda, I just want to take the opportunity to acknowledge our Executive Officer, Antoinette Sorek's 7-year anniversary coming up next week on November 25th. She was appointed on November 25th, 2013, and on behalf of the board, we send her warm congratulations and a happy anniversary to her for being a part of the board, for leading the Board of Psychology as Executive Officer. So happy anniversary, Antoinette, and thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
So with that, we will take up item 21 with regard to public comment for items not on the agenda. A note that the board may not discuss or take action on any matter raised during this public comment section, except to decide whether to place the matter on the agenda for a future meeting pursuant to Government Code Sections 11125 and 11125.7a. I should have also mentioned that, as stated yesterday, that the location of the board members will not be disclosed. That the board member locations nor public meeting location are provided pursuant to the provisions of Governor Gavin Newsom's Executive Order N2920, dated March 17, 2020. As a part of this public comment, public participation may be through the Webex link as provided below. If you are having trouble getting on the call to listen or to participate, please call 916-574-7720. Again, that number, more slowly, is 916-574-7720. for folks who may have had difficulty participating on the public comment piece. And as we usually say, we ask that you, as a part of the public comment section, that you not discuss the specifics, including names as to pending complaints, pending licensing applications, or pending disciplinary actions that may come before the board for a decision. Such discussions are considered ex parte communications, as they would provide information to the members that is outside of the record in violation of the Administrative Procedure Act. Therefore, such discussions may create a conflict and interfere with the board's capacity to make necessary determinations. Board staff is available to speak to you individually and answer your questions outside of the hearing of board members. You may reach them at bopmail@dcaa.ca.gov. That's B as in board, OP as in Peter, mail, MAIL @dca.ca.gov. The board is eager to listen attentively to your comments. And while we, as I expressed earlier, may not be able to engage in further discussion with you, we are looking forward to your input and thoughts. And with that, Madam Moderator, could you please open up the Q&A?
The Q&A feature has been opened for public comment. The slide on here for public comment instruction shows that if you click on the Q&A icon, it will open up a comment field. Go ahead and type that you would like to make a comment. We will look for the raised hand for you, and we will unmute you after we call on your name.
I see Ms. Kathleen Russell. Madam Moderator, could you please unmute Ms. Russell for public comment for items not on the agenda, please?
There you go. Kathleen Russell, you have been unmuted.
Thank you so much, and thank you, board members, for the opportunity to address you on matters not on the agenda. I'm just to recap, I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Judicial Excellence. And I was doing some research on your agenda item related to the statutory change that the Enforcement Committee is recommending for action today. And I came across a related, but not specific to that agenda item, code section in the Business and Professions Code. And I wanted to ask the board to please put this on a future agenda. In Business and Professions Code section 129, it states in subsection D that it shall be the continuing duty of the board to ascertain patterns of complaints and to report on all actions taken with respect to those patterns of complaints to the director and to the legislature at least once per year. The board shall evaluate those complaints dismissed for lack of jurisdiction or no violation and recommend to the director and to the legislature at least once per year the statutory changes it deems necessary to implement the board's functions and responsibilities under this section. So I guess my question to the board or to the Enforcement Committee staff is whether this annual reporting is taking place. And this just comes out of the discussion yesterday about the multiple complaint licensees, of which Ms. Monterrubio mentioned there were 18 licensees that had multiple complaints that work in the child custody arena. And just for, so you understand that custody evaluators can work on as many as 4,000 to 5,000 custody cases in their career. So the fact that 18 of them have multiple complaints, they're each potentially affecting thousands of children. And so I do think that this code section deals directly with the issue of patterns of complaints. So I'd appreciate that being discussed at a future meeting. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Russell. Really appreciate that feedback. And I'm asking that the board staff take a look at that section and provide comments back to the board to decide how to proceed further, since I know they're looking into it. So thank you, Ms. Russell. Really appreciate that. Madam Moderator, I don't see any additional folks in this queue for public comment, and I'm speaking a little bit slowly so that folks may add that they may wish to do so if they haven't. And seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and ask that you close the comment section, public comment section for this item.
I apologize. I'm closing it now.
Thanks. Before moving on, I also just want to express our thanks to Solid for continuing to be a fabulous partner with us. Really appreciate the work that you've been doing to help facilitate these meetings during these really challenging times and allowing the board's business to be able to still be conducted remotely. And with also our appreciation to colleagues with DCA Legal, including Noreen Marks, Will McGuire, and Clay Jackson, who are participating and advising us today. And I believe our liaison and colleague, Mr. Temple with the Attorney General's office is also on today, so with thanks to him as well. So with that, I think what we're going to do with the time we have is return to some of the items that were held yesterday to continue these discussions. And I ask that you bear with us a little bit as we work through some of those carryover items. So I would like for us to return to item 14. This is with regard to consideration of adopting amendments to 1381.9, et cetera, as you see on item number 14. I'm going to ask that either Mr. Glass-Steagall or Mr. Jackson explain what is before the board as it relates to this item, in particular in relation to our regulatory hearing yesterday.
Good morning, this is Jason. Yesterday we had the regulatory hearing for this regulatory package, and staff took the verbal comments, summarized them, and put them into the comment sheet that we had with tallies. We made some preliminary changes to the language based on the comments and the discussion from the board. We moved the implementation date out, and we added virtual attendance at a conference meeting. And now we have redistributed the language, and I actually am able to present it in a Word version for the committee's continued discussion today, or the board's, I'm sorry.
Great. Is that Word version actually going to be displayed on the Webex, or is it just for download at the board's website?
I'm going to present it on the Webex.
Oh, then look at us using modern technology. Mr. Glass-Steagall, hats off to you for embarking upon this.
No problem. You ready for that?
Yes, we're braced. Let's go.
Okay. Madam Moderator, will you allow me to present? Thank you. Let me know if you can see the text.
Yes, Jason, but if you could, if it's not too much, yeah, just zoom in a little bit. And then for folks who are participating by Webex, there's a way to change your view so that the share screen is completely taking up your screen so you're able to see that. All right, Mr. Glass-Steagall, walk us through.
All right, so here's the first section, 1381.9. In all the sections, you'll see that we went through with double strikeout and double underline for implementation dates. So the old sections will expire at the end of 2021. The new sections will become effective the beginning of 2022. Other than that, once we get down to the definition of conference attendance, you can see here that we added either in person or via electronic means, and those are the only changes. So at this point, the board is free to begin discussing the language and any additional changes.
Board members, I think we heard a couple things from Mr. Gosspiegel about the change of the deadlines for the implementation deadline, and also I think a recognition that with this pandemic, the attendance of a virtual conference is permissible. I wanted, if board members, if you want to raise your hand or unmute yourself to ask me further questions based on the comments we heard orally as well as reviewed in written format, this will be an opportunity to ask Mr. Gosspiegel how those comments have been addressed as a part of this.
Hi, this is Clay Jackson.
Hi, Mr. Jackson.
Can everybody hear me? Hope so. Okay. Yeah. On this, yesterday, Jason and I met. We'd taken notes on the public comment that was made, and many of the public commenters had already written letters, and then we're just pulling highlights from their letters in their public comments. And so we looked at the comments that were made verbally. We looked at the ones that were made in writing, and where people had kind of Me Too'd to the written comments. We went in and added, if you look at the list that we provided, we added on the right a number, so 2, 3, up to 6 or 7, I believe. And so those were the way we added directly the public comments, and any comments that were different from what was in the written comments, we then wrote down the comments as add-ons to what was previously there. So all of the comments are on the sheet that Jason provided last night, and they've been updated to include the oral comments. Was there another question or?
Thanks so much, Mr. Jackson. And just for Mr. Gosspiegel, I see your phone, your microphone's unmuted, so I want to turn to you.
Oh, I had nothing to add. I was just prepared in case board had questions.
Thank you for that. Board members, any questions on the review of the comments that were submitted orally? And as background, I think what we're being asked to do here is to consider the verbal and written comments received during the hearing and the 45-day comment period, provide feedback to board staff and to Mr. Jackson with regard to the comments, and if we're agreed upon with the language here, that we then go ahead and have a motion for that language to continue in the next stage of the regulatory package. I don't think we are there quite yet in terms of where we are procedurally, in terms of the conversation, but just want to lay out what the roadmap is. So board members, any questions or comments? And I know we're pulling up those documents probably, and that's why there's silence.
So, Mr. Fu, sorry, could you tell us, like, as we've reviewed the comments and would like to have a discussion about a particular aspect, is it appropriate to bring that up at this time?
Yes, Madam Vice President, please do.
Okay, I would like to discuss the implementation date. The comments have been made that the implementation date of of January 1 of 2021 seems very soon. And so I would like to have a conversation about that.
Yes, Madam Vice President. Jason, Mr. Glass-Steagall, I believe you mentioned at the presentation that we changed the implementation date. Can you pull that up so that it's what the board's being asked to do is to change the implementation date to December 31st, 2021, and it's been incorporated here.
And I see that in the document. So do we need to have a discussion about it and to vote on that?
I think we would vote on the entire regulatory language to advance further. So if folks are concerned about the 2021 deadline here, I would ask that board members express that. So Dr. Harpsheets, if you have concern about that deadline and would like to offer thoughts and potential changes to it, please do.
So if I'm reading this correctly, the date was changed to be implemented on January 1st of 2022. Is that correct?
Yes, I apologize. I was looking at the effective date. My apologies.
Right. Okay, great. Okay, that's just what I needed to know. I don't have any concerns about that.
Any board members have concerns about the 2022 language implementation deadline? All right, seeing none. Mr. Glass-Steagall, Dr. Phillips, please.
I did not unmute myself first. I understand that in the current pandemic situation that virtual conference attendance is, for most of us, is the only real option that's available to us. However, as I understood it, as we were going through the process of constructing these regulations, the purpose of giving people credit for virtual conference or for conference attendance was that there was going to be active interaction with other psychologists, that they were going to be pressed in the flesh with other psychologists, give them an opportunity to discuss the materials they were seeing, possibly talk about what's coming up in their practice with their colleagues. In a virtual conference setting where, for instance, there's 200 or 1,000 or 2,000 people in attendance, seeing everybody on a Zoom screen doesn't really kind of serve that purpose. So I'm not sure that we should make the change to include virtual conference attendance as a means of obtaining CPD credit.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Mr. Glass-Steagall, could you pull up the language related to virtual conference so we can see what's the context for it? So the double strike, the double underline is the new addition from yesterday for reference. And so now either in person or via electronic means. And that's where Dr. Phillips' comment is related to. Board members, thoughts and reflections on Dr. Phillips' comment with regard to virtual attendance and its inclusion here as suggested by Mr. Glass, by board staff to reflect the comments submitted. While we ruminate, Dr. Phillips, I would say that I wonder if we could use the language in such a way where the virtual means is conditioned upon the declaration of an emergency order, perhaps, because I heard a comment yesterday that given where we are, there might be a situation in the future where we won't be able to meet in person because of another potential pandemic, etc. And so I wonder if the virtual attendance could be conditioned upon a declaration of emergency that would preclude us from meeting in person or a prohibition on large gatherings. I wonder if that would be acceptable to you and to balance out the need of what you've raised. And then as Dr. Phillips responds to that, I see Dr. Kasuga and Dr. Harpsey have unmuted their mics, so I'll turn to them as well afterwards.
I think that'd be fine. I think we should just create a separate sentence that says, under circumstances during which, I don't know, an emergency order in place, which interferes with capacity to attend the conference in person, then they could get credit for conference attendance. But I don't think we should just make it for all circumstances. I mean, I suspect in the future we're going to have opportunities to either virtually or in person attend conferences, much like we will see in psychotherapy. A lot more people will exercise the opportunity to do the work virtually rather than in person. So I think that's a nice compromise.
Dr. Kasuga?
Hi. I just wanted to bring up 2 points. One is I recognize what Dr. Phillips is talking about. I also just wanted to bring up the points that some of the comments that were raised yesterday with regards breakout sessions in those Zoom meetings that are part of certain conferences that allow for interaction and additional meetings like as part of the conference, such as virtual special interest group meetings would fall into acceptable means that electronically it would satisfy this criteria of what this was intended for, the interaction between licensees and other professionals. So I just wanted to kind of bring those points up as well. And I have participated in some of those conferences where they had additional group meetings that allow for more interaction, during this pandemic time. And I wonder if that would suffice for you, Dr. Phillips. Another thing that I just want to bring up is I think the concern for allowing electronic means is more for live CE yesterday. I think that was kind of what was raised. And another thing that I just wanted to point out in terms of concerns about conferences is the double counting of certain sponsored CE and attending the conference, getting double credit for those. I don't think it was clarified. There were questions about clarifying those. I just want to make sure that it's addressed in the language. That's all. Thank you.
Dr. Harpsey?
Yeah, I would like to suggest that we consider allowing conferences via electronic means that do allow for interaction. I think more and more conferences are using, for example, breakout groups. It can become very difficult for people, particularly as we've seen comments regarding, public comments regarding older psychologists, people perhaps who are disabled, people perhaps who have less financial wherewithal to attend conferences. And so allowing electronic means that do involve some level of interaction among participants could be certainly as effective in terms of what our goals are as actually the person being there in person. So I'd like to ask us to consider allowing but maybe perhaps being clearer about what we mean around interaction if it's electronic in situations other than emergency situations.
I'm going to suggest that actually I withdraw my objection to virtual conference attendance, and the reason being I think it does speak to the issue of access that has come up in the course of the public comments. And I also am cognizant of the fact that at least some conferences are more interactive in their nature. In terms of the double counting question, you can go to a conference under these regulations. You can get your CE hours for all the CEs that you attend. You can get an additional hour or whatever the measure might be for the number of days that you attend the conference. So it is intended in some ways to incentivize people going to larger gatherings where they're more likely to have interaction with others. Although I appreciate the suggestion made by Dr. Harpsheets regarding the possibility of tightening the definition of a virtual conference needing to have some interactive component. I think honestly, just in terms of time accounting on the part of licensees and in terms of our own auditors, probably be easier if we just leave it at attending the conference for a full day. Hopefully more of these conferences will move into this more interactive element, which appears to be the trend. So I'd say good change. I withdraw my objection to the change.
I can also say that instead of putting conference convention attendance, that we can consider putting conference or convention participation. So that highlights the participative nature of what we intend this to be.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is, so just bring some support to this for folks taking a few steps back. So folks, you can refer to item 14D through E, CPD comments categorized with comments attached, 1119 PDF. This was in your hand carry item. This reflects the categorization of the comments yesterday as well as the written comments in a chart form. So when you pull it up, it should have the Board of Psychology logo on it, and then it will have a chart that says category comment multiplier, and it will have categories that start with honor, older psychologist, conference attendance, etc. So while you pull that up, what I'm going to do is walk us through this process. What we're going to go through is we're going to go through each category, and we're going to either accept those comments or not accept them. And if we do accept them, we modify the language that would be in reference to with Mr. Glass-Steagall's assistant on the Webex. After we go through each category in terms of choosing to accept or not accept, we will then vote on what the entire language based on how we've moved through that. Of course, we'll include public comments as a part of that section before any vote is taken. So we'll have that done through. So because we skipped around a little bit, I'm going to actually start with the conference attendance one because that's where we landed at first. And so the conference attendance one, you can see about 6 comments there, excuse me. And it seems like with Dr. Phillips' withdrawal of his objections, I believe we've accepted the comments with regard to the attendance of the conference virtually. So without objection, we'll include that. And then we've also discussed as a part of this conversation the double counting, and I want to make sure that we've heard that as well. I believe Dr. Kasuga, you raised that up. Is that correct?
This is Dr. Harpsheets. Do we have in our packet what is projected on the screen so that we can look at the revised regulations besides what's on the screen?
Mr. Glass-Steagall, I believe we have the regs on page 40 of 50 in our packet, but we don't have the double underline. But you've only added 2 sections for double underline, which was the implementation date and then this section we're seeing now. Is that correct, Mr. Glass-Steagall?
You are correct to the changes that I made, and then the double underline, this version, I believe is in the cloud. Was put in the cloud yesterday for you guys.
This particular version?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. I will look for it. I didn't see it. Thank you.
No problem.
And in defense of our capable staff, they sent us an email at the end of the day yesterday letting us know that there were new hand carries related to this item. So should be fairly fine. If you go in the cloud, I think it says hand carry for the second day.
I saw that. I just didn't see the regs. I see the other.
I got the regs out of there.
Okay, I'm going to look again.
It's the second attachment, Dr. Harpsheets. Oh. Am I muted?
Okay, I'm not muted now. I will look and see for that second attachment. I will find it.
Are you not muted?
Mm-mm.
Antoinette, you're unmuted. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. Jason was telling me that I was muted, and I was seeing that I was unmuted. So dealing with technology. Okay, so in the new hand carry box that was sent, I believe yesterday, the second attachment says CPD text modified after 45 days. So that is the attachment that should have the double underline language. And those 2 changes were just the effective date and then the electronic participation in the conference.
I found it. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, so as folks pull that up, let's continue this conversation around the conference attendance piece. So we're accepting these comments with regard to the virtual attendance. Do other board members have any of the other items here that they would like to accept with regard to conference attendance? And I'm going to do a longer pause because I know we're pulling these documents up.
Mr. Fu?
Yes.
This is Jason. I just wanted to highlight one additional question that would fall within the conference attendance piece. But currently the credit for conference attendance is 1 credit for 1 unit, 1 hour for an entire day's attendance. There was a couple comments that we received saying, what if a conference ends on a half day at the last day, like on a Sunday? Would it be possible to get half the credits for that last day? So just something for the board to consider and discuss as it relates to conference attendance. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Glass-Steagall. And I certainly would be open to that on that to provide that half credit.
Well, I'm sympathetic to that situation. Well, what about a quarter day? What about an extra hour the following day? I think we're better off just saying a full day. You go to the full day of the conference, you get an hour. If it's a day and a half, you're still going to get an hour, but you're also getting your CE credits, sponsored continuing education credits. So it's just an opportunity for people to put themselves in participatory situations. But I think if we start kind of creating fractional hours unnecessarily, I think we're going to make this thing incredibly complicated for people to deal with. And we're going to get a lot of questions about if the conference is 2 hours one night and it's 8 hours the next day. So I get 1.25 hours. So I think we're better off just kind of keeping it at 1 hour for one full day.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Any folks with a differing opinion on that front? All right. So for our purposes here, we've accepted the comments with regard to the conference attendance being virtually or in person, and that's been clarified. I have not heard desires to accept the remainder of the comments in the conference attendance section. For tracking purposes, staff will consider those rejected. I want to make sure that we return to the point that Dr. Kasuga made, which was with regard to the title of this section being conference convention attendance and turning that to participation. Mr. Jackson, or is that something that we could change, or is that, and I guess to the rest of the board, is that something we want to make a change as well? So board members, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Mr. Jackson.
This would be the time to change it if the board's going to change it. Any changes from today would be going out to a 15-day comment period, as I discussed yesterday. So if any further revisions would be requested, this is pretty much the last chance during this iteration.
Board members, any objections to Dr. Kasuga's proposal to changing it to participation rather than attendance?
Attendance is still clear, so maybe attendance and participation.
Sorry, Dr. Kasuga, you would like to add attendance and participation?
Yeah.
Okay, understood. Okay. Any objections to that inclusion, board members? And again, we're going to just document all these changes as we go along and then adopt them wholesale, especially after input from public comment.
I have no objection to that as long as it's not language that comes from the enabling statute that allows us to go through this regulatory process. I don't think it got that granular, the statute under which these regulations were provided. I think we only gave the 4 major categories, but I'm ready to stand corrected if staff recalls otherwise.
So
you might have, excuse me, this is Clay Jackson. You might have clarity issues if you say participation, because attendance is you're logged in, you're attending, you're there, however you decide to go or however it's presented. But if there's participation, that might, attendance and participation, it might be argued that you can only attend if you participate, even if there's no participation. So there might be clarity issues with adding and participation.
I guess I would also add that when we do get certificates for attending continuing education programs, they do say that we attended this program. So maybe just keeping that consistent, leaving it at that.
I was thinking the same in terms of like the quantification of participation and attendance is more clear. So I withdraw my suggestion.
Dr. Phillips, your hand's raised. Any additional comments on that?
Sorry, I left my hand raised. Never mind.
It's all great. Okay, so sorry, yes, Noreen?
I'm not sure if this will hopefully help just resolve this. Do you want to say where it says either in person or via electronic means that consists of multiple concurrent sequential freestanding presentation, where the licensee has interacts with and has means to participate in? Is that where you're going with it? So it's not necessarily that you have to participate and you have to participate meaningfully, but you have the opportunity to participate. Is that where you're going with this? And would that help?
I think Dr. Kasuga's withdrawal of her objection
Okay.
I think we can let that language stand unless Dr. Kasuga, you feel differently.
I'm fine with the language as is. Thank you.
Great. All right. So for our purposes here with regard to category conference attendance, the board is going to be accepting, reflecting this language, the virtual or in person, and not accepting the remaining comments for this section. I'm going to then turn back to the first category with regard to older psychologists. Are there board members where they would like to accept any of the comments with regard to the comments made here? And Dr. Phillips, I believe you had, in your opening statement yesterday, I think you actually addressed some of these comments in your opening remarks, I should say.
That's correct. I mean, I am sympathetic to the fact that we become less mobile as we get older, and some things may become more challenging. But the ask is not that big. I mean, we're really asking people to do 9 hours differently than they've done it in the past. 6 of those could be them reading and studying on their own on a particular topic. So it's really require 3 hours of something else at a minimum. And they could get that 3 hours by having formal consultations with their peers, whether that's an individual or a group, as the definition of peer supervision points out. So it's fairly easy to do this without ever having to leave your home, particularly now that we've also added in virtual conference attendance. So while I'm respectful of the experience of older adults and perhaps the understandable reluctance to see the system change, I really don't think there's cause for us to feel that we're making this impossible for older members of the profession.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes. I think the one problem that you might engender by putting in items for older members would be you might have some ageism claims, because that's a society we live in, and by creating something for older members, you might have a lawsuit from younger members that say, I've got children, I've got all these other issues, my life's more hectic than my parents might be or whatever, because they don't have children. They've got less on their plate. And then you're going to throw the board in the middle of which one of these ages do you want to discriminate against, not for. And then you've also got, if you're going to start looking at disabilities, which disabilities would you start saying are acceptable to get a waiver versus those that are not acceptable to get a waiver? So you might be opening up some problems for the board in the future if you start discriminating for or against any group of people.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Dr. Phillips, your hand's raised.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to add is, I mean, if we're going to continue to practice, and I'm getting older, I'm in my 60s now, and I'm going to be in my 70s soon enough. As we get older, we still have an obligation, if we wanted to continue to practice, to maintain some minimum efforts toward competency, which is really what the continuing professional development scheme is. We can't guarantee that people are competent, but we can try to maximize the possibility or probability that they will maintain competence by continuing to be actively engaged with new material, with their colleagues, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it's a good idea in any event to create some kind of exemption for or senior status for older adults, since truthfully, our expectation is that they be as competent and as well informed as any of their younger colleagues. As I mentioned yesterday, competency is not a fixed quality. If you don't achieve competency and then you just walk around and say, I'm competent, you have to maintain competency over time, and that requires the incorporation of new information, new methods. As a psychologist, we always need to be learning in order to stay abreast of what's going on in the field and in order to provide the best service that we can to consumers. So I think that's a universal requirement of all licensed psychologists. And if people are finding it onerous to stay abreast of the field and to continue to get training and to continue to come into contact with other colleagues, that doesn't make me feel good about them continuing to practice psychology as it relates to consumers. So I think our expectations should be the same. Friggin' phone. Should be the same as it relates to all psychologists.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Any board members with additional comment on this item or a differing opinion? All right, not seeing any mics unmuted or hands raised. Without objection, we're going to go ahead and consider these comments rejected for our purposes here. Going to take up fraudulent CPD unit discipline. Any comments here that folks would like to discuss? And staff, any responses to these? Dr. Phillips?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I mean, first we're accused kind of micromanaging in the comments, and that we don't trust our licensees. And then we provide categories where they have to self-certify that they perform these functions, and suddenly licensees are concerned about whether other licensees are going to be committing fraudulent activity in this regard. To a certain extent, I mean, I can go get CE hours and honestly sleep in the back row of a CE unless the instructor rousts me out. Not that I would do that, but I've gone to CE conventions or CE events where people are, revising reports in the back row or texting through the entire thing or chatting with their neighbors. To a certain extent, we have to rely on the good faith of people in the profession. And I feel comfortable doing that because I have respect for the people that are in the profession. There are always going to be outliers. There's always going to be people that are going to do the bare minimum or going to find a way to meet the requirements without actually putting in the effort. But I think it's our obligation to make sure that we at least put them in situations where they can come in contact with their peers, they can continue to gain new information, they can learn about the application of new methods. So I personally trust our licensees in general enough to rely on self-certification. I mean, even our process of auditing continuing education hours, although we audit a certain percentage of licensees, some licensees are not going to be audited in any particular given licensing cycle. And we rely on them to be honest in the forms they're signing. And I believe enough in my profession and in the professionals in that profession that I think the best we can do is rely on their own personal sense of conscience and commitment to the betterment of psychology and the promotion of better psychological services for consumers. So I think this is kind of I don't think it's an issue that there's any way to address.
Any additional board comments? Okay. So we're not seeing any. We're going to move to this next section here with regard to qualitative Cpd issues. Any comments here that folks want to discuss, accept, and have language reflect these comments? I think there were comments here about having all 36 hours from the sponsored continuing education category, which I think defeats the purpose of this intention of this regulation to broaden it and require different disciplines, different categories. So I know for me personally, I wouldn't be responsive to that. But any particular items here that board members want to accept? And actually what I'm going to do is, because we've gone through some pretty big chunks here, to inform our conversations, what I'm going to ask Madam Moderator to do is open up the public comment section. such that we can hear from folks with regard to the qualitative CPD CE categories, the fraudulent CPD unit, conference attendance, and older psychologists.
The Q&A feature has been open, and we will be putting up the slide for instructions. If anyone would like to make a public comment, go ahead and open the Q&A icon. Go ahead and type in that you would like to make a public comment, and we will go ahead and call on you. Thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any folks who've added that they would like to make comments with regard to our current discussion. So, oh, sorry, Dr. Jolinda Crow coming in at 12:59. Dr. Jolinda Crow.
As you go through these, this category, qualitative CPD CE issues, I do see that there's one that refers to clarifying that the BOP meeting attendance can be in person or virtual. And I know that that change wasn't made. Just wondered if that was an oversight or if that was where you want to leave it with having to attend board meetings in person. And then are you going to, I mean, are there any of these others, and I'm just looking through them one more time, that were covered in the first part? I don't think so. I guess all of these are separate from any other comments. Is that right? So there aren't any of these that would have been covered under accepting the first section, you know, just so we don't get into a conflict there. I don't see any other.
If I can just...
Sorry, I'm not being very clear.
Patch in real quickly. The amendment that was made in the suggested changes was for the conference attendance.
Right.
The problem with board meeting electronic attendance is it may be more difficult to track if the person is participating, and we don't have a means by which necessarily to capture that. As you can see, there's panelists or attendees in Webex, but someone may go out or in, and in order to give them the credit, you would have to have a person that could monitor that, and we don't have the resources to do that, but if it was in person, it would be much easier to monitor attendance for our staff. So is that something that's possible for you guys? Or
yeah, I don't disagree with you, and also I'm very happy with where you landed on the conference attendance, because as you were talking about that, I was thinking the same thing. There's no way really to verify participation in something, and so I think this is very much the same issue, and I can understand that you wouldn't have a very good way of tracking. I don't see anything else in this section that, except maybe that one about the client modifier. But I expect that some of these clarifications are things that will need to be covered in like a frequently asked questions document or something like that. That you can't put, you can't put every single thing in the reg, but you can. Like this one that says, make it clear that client identifiers should not include any confidential information. There was a suggestion for maybe saying client identifiers such as client initials or a number. So it just depends on how specific you want to get here, or whether you can maybe think of doing some FAQs that will get, as someone said earlier, I think Dr. Phillips said, it can get more granular in the FAQs that you might not want to get in regs.
I think it's a great suggestion, Dr. Linda Crow, that we do have FAQs, and I think that will be really useful to people. Hopefully that'll be part of our educational effort in helping people to understand how the new regulations are going to work. I do also, as a psychologist, we should always be concerned about protecting the confidentiality of our client. I would assume that most licensed psychologists know for any documents that might fall into the wrong hands that you use client identifiers or that you have maximal security around those documents. I don't think we need to get quite so specific. Again, I feel like we fall in the category of over-managing, which you've already been micromanaging, I guess. So, but if people need clarification regarding that, we're happy to provide it.
Thank you.
Right, we'll be happy to help, and I expect this is probably will need to be a joint effort, as we discussed in the past, between CPA with our members and broader audience, and also with the board. And I think we can accomplish that.
And we really appreciate that. We really do. I think it'll be really helpful. I think it'll give them an alternative source of information, one they might feel is more closely identified with themselves. I know that there's just a certain amount of anxiety that psychologists have when changes like this are made about how, which side of the line to be on, and am I doing this correctly? Most psychologists have an overdeveloped superego, so it's not all that. We tend to be a nervous lot when it comes to lines and rules. But I think some of this is going to die down with education, and a lot of it is an expression of that anxiety.
Before we turn to the next speaker, to Dr. McCall, Mr. Jackson, do you have comments that you would like to make?
I do. On the issue of an FAQ, I agree that they're great. The problem is if we leave too much wiggle room or unclarity in the regulation that's expected to fall into an FAQ, the FAQ might be considered an underground regulation, which would be worse than just fixing the reg and making it more specific and more clear. So that would be my concern.
Well, using the example of the client identifiers, that's a standard of practice in the field. I don't think that needs to be set by our regulation relative to confidentiality of one particular piece of information. So I don't know how much this is really going to come up as a problem, or whether we would even choose to include it in the FAQs. Obviously, we'll want your counsel when we go through those FAQs to make sure that we're not doing anything that would constitute an underground regulation.
Thank you. Madam Moderator, could you please unmute Dr. McCall, please? And actually, Dr. Jo Linda Crow would like to make a comment coming in. And so, Dr. Jo Linda Crow, let's return back to you because I suspect it's in relation to this ongoing discussion.
Thank you. Yes. Was that Mr. Jackson, or who was that speaking?
That was Mr. Jackson and Dr.
Mr. Jackson. So I'm curious, I think we run into this frequently, and I'm just curious, perhaps you could answer this question for me. And I understand what you're saying about underground regs and so forth. But all regulations, I mean, this is a set of regulations that definitely will have to be interpreted, because there will be no way to clarify every single situation that's going to come up. And we know that because we had a virtual conversation about this, and we had over 200 people who just came to go through the proposed language with me and try to figure out what it meant. And we had so many questions. So does it fall to the board? It must fall to the board staff then to be able to interpret the regs for licensees. Am I correct in that?
Sorry, I'm trying to type and unmute my computer on a different issue. The problem, and I've seen it in a prior life outside of DCA, is there was some regs that were rather clear. There were also regs that were unclear, and the regulatory body decided to do a multi-page FAQ to make it, quote, understandable. And the problem was they misstated numerous regulations. They misstated the law. They threw in things that were, they threw in items that were best practices that were found nowhere in any California law, regulation, or statute. And then they told the regulated public, and by the way, you live with this. You have to comply with this. And so that's why I made the statement I did. I think FAQs are great, but in that case, those were underground regulations. And the way I was brought to a knowledge of that was the prior chief of the division called me and said, "You want to look at these because these are underground regs and they're illegal." So
I see. Well,
that's why I'm bringing it up.
Yeah, I'm just curious again if maybe to my question, whose responsibility is it to answer questions about particular situations that may or may not fall under one of these, may or may not qualify in one of these categories? Is that I assume that would be the board staff?
That would be board staff. And Ms. McCochran, who's on the line, is our continuing education's coordinator, so she would be able to answer questions on qualifying activities.
Great. Thank you.
Dr. McCall?
Yes, am I on?
You are.
Nice. So anticipating the inevitable when, not if, there's an audit, CEUs are easy because you've got the certificates. Article writing is easy because you've got the citation. So some of the stuff that, like we just talked about here with the board meeting, would be helpful to understand what kind of guidance. Be great if more of us attended the BOP meetings, myself included. But what's going to be the verification thereof? Is it making appearances at the morning and the afternoon session? Will there be a sign-in sheet? Will there does a psychologist need to bring a prepared letter to get signed by someone, while they're there? It'd be good to kind of anticipate that, as well as in order to make any kind of auditing go smoother, I think, for everybody involved. And maybe kind of to that end, do we want kind of receipts for consultation kind of things, lists of the articles that one has read, possibly for the self-directed learning. So might be good to have some good guidance as to what verification and documentation would help for the inevitable auditing and compliance. That's all.
Thank you so much, Dr. McCall. And staff on the phone, on this Webex, I know are taking serious consideration with that to make sure that it's equitable and clear to everyone involved. Dr. Winkleman?
Hi, Dr. Elizabeth Winkleman from California Psychological Association. Just have a couple of comments. Since as has been mentioned, this is going to be the final opportunity to change things. One is, I have a question. We had in the CPA comments on page 2, I believe there's an error in section 1397.61A. It refers to the Business and Professions Code 2915E, but that doesn't appear to be relevant. I believe it's supposed to be 2915G. So perhaps Ms. Marks or Mr. Jackson, if they've looked at that, perhaps I'm wrong, but I think that that's an error. and if this would be a good time to correct it if they agree. And that's what
I'm sorry, Dr. Winkleman. I'm doing a search, but it's catching that code section in the footer of every page, so that's not very helpful. Can you tell me what page that is on again?
Well, I'm looking at our comments. Yeah, let's see, it's on 1397.61A.
I can share the document as well again, if that would be helpful.
Yes. I think folks have a good handle in this section on how to do public comment. So to our colleagues at Solid, could you please give Mr. Glass-Steagall access so that he can pull that up on the Webex, please?
Access has been granted.
Thank you.
So the reference to 2915E, let's see. I believe that is incorrect, and it should be 2915G. But I don't know that we need open meeting time. I just would like someone to look into that. And Ms. Marks, if you agree, I think it's just a technical correction. It's not. It's up to you, the board, how you want to handle it. But I don't have a need for you to look at it while everyone's waiting.
Okay. Yeah, we can. I can talk. Look for that later. What I see up on the screen right now is existing language. So
right, and I believe that should be 2915G.
But that's existing language. So
right, it would need to be changed from 2915E to 2915G if you agree with my comment.
Okay, I can take a look at that, and Mr. Jackson can take a look at that as well.
Great, thanks very much. Yeah, and as I said, as long as you look at it, I'll be glad about that. The other thing is I wanted to mention in terms of either clarifying the regulation or something that will need to be in the FAQ is many of our members have a question about really the definition of the peer consultation. And I know that Dr. Phillips, you've made several comments about what would count and not count, which I appreciate, but I think that there are going to be questions about that with the language saying structured and organized interaction, and people are wondering if they get a consultation with me or with the CPA ethics committee, or they just call a colleague on the phone. People are going to have a lot of questions about that, so I just wanted to raise that in terms of either it can be addressed by changing that now, or it may just be something that needs to be in an FAQ, but that's I think that is an area that people are going to want some kind of official clarification beyond a verbal statement in a board meeting to what would count, because most, they're not all able to attend the meetings, and we would like to be able to refer to a written statement that might help clarify what that means.
What it means is that it's a structured appointment with a particular person for a particular purpose, and then it's going to constitute that consultation. It doesn't mean if you're in a large suite and you run into somebody in the hall and you start jawboning about various things, that in and of itself. So what we want is, if it's a peer consultation group, they meet from this time to that time. Whatever their agenda is relative to peer consultation. If it's with a consultant, that it is an actual appointment with a consultant to do that, not just, you pop your head into the door next door and you guys yacked for 45 minutes. So that's the intention behind the way it's described in terms of it being, a structured and definite thing. That certainly can be clarified. A peer consultation, for instance, your peer is not an attorney. They're not one of your peers. They're in a different profession. But there is room, of course, to have a consultation with other people in the mental health field. So I think it's actually kind of fairly clear, but I can understand people are very nervous about what's going to constitute a consultation and what will not. I don't know.
I think people might have, I really appreciate that. I think people are still going to have questions. And as I said, if it's an FAQ, that's fine, because there always are going to be these middle ground, like, well, what if I say to the person in my suite, oh, let's talk at 2 o'clock. I have a case I want to talk with you about, or let's talk in 5 minutes. I mean, is it structured and organized about a particular case? Yes. Does that count? You know, so anyway, I think people are going to have questions because they are very concerned about making sure they comply if they get audited. But well, maybe others on the committee who are psychologists also I wonder if they feel that it's clear or want to do it in an FAQ. You're going to get questions. I think you're going to get questions.
Dr. Winkleman, we'll take that comment under submission when we hit the peer consultation supervision section, which is a block of comment as well. So we'll be sure to bring this topic again in a few moments.
Thank you. And then I have one final comment on this section, which is, and it may be that the board has already decided against this, I'm not quite sure, but just to consider, given what the older psychologist comments in the initial section and the comments in this section, to still consider that it will be possible to maintain the 2 different categories, but modify the language such that people could fulfill all of those categories through sponsored CE and self-directed learning, and to consider that as an option. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further public comment, we're going to go ahead and close this section. Dr. Kasuga, I saw your microphone unmuted briefly. Did you have comments that you would like to make?
I can wait until we talk about peer consultation because it's related to that.
Great, thank you. All right, so reviewing this section then, I think when it comes to the rejection of the comments with regard to hardship on older psychologists, those comments are considered rejected for the reasons that Dr. Phillips articulated yesterday and today, and also that Mr. Jackson articulated with regard to ageism. And then with regard to the conference attendance, we've accepted the virtual, we've rejected the remainder of the comments for the reasons of with relation to tracking the partial credits, etc. With relation to the fraudulent CPD units, we heard comments about making sure that we're diligent about how we go about in our administration of this. Those will be reflected in some sort of guidance from the board, but for the purpose of the regulations, we're rejecting the comments here under fraudulent CPD units for the reasons articulated, though we will not use Dr. Phillips' term that of super ego for those rejection of those comments. And then for the qualitative CPD CE issues, just want to make sure we didn't really spend a lot of time before I turn to public comment. So I just want to go back to this and make sure that there aren't any board members who would like any of these items accepted or to have them discussed in a particular fashion. All right, so not seeing any mics unmuted or hands raised, we are considering these rejected for the, actually, Dr. Phillips, could you share why we're rejecting these comments with regard to qualitative CPD CE issues?
Sorry, I'm switching between screens. I'm looking at one screen for one thing. And, these have been actively considered and do not appear to be relevant. And in particular, we have made a substantial alteration already to the number of sponsored continuing education hours people can receive. But we do want people to move beyond the scope of those 27 hours of continuing education to also give themselves opportunities for various other forms of learning and various situations which may put them in a more interactive environment and thereby decrease the isolation of psychological practitioners and to open many other avenues of learning. That's it.
Thanks, Dr. Phillips. Any other board members have comments on this section that they want to lift up? All right, moving on to quantitative CPD issues. Any items here with regard, so for example, there were comments here that with the multiplier of 5 alternative methods or recommendations to perform CPD with 27 credits would be too limiting. There were also consideration that it was 18 hours of CE was too few. There were 3 multipliers in that section. Any board members want to accept Mr. Jackson comments?
I just want to clarify for the discussion, because people were making comments that there should be this many hours versus this many hours, and 36 is too much, but 27 is not enough, and 18 is great. We decided to put any item with numbers in them into this quantified section, and then under the section, can't remember what we called it. Under the
qualitative
section, qualitative. Thank you. Under qualitative, we had the comments that related to the content of the various comments. So the ones where people were commenting on the quality or the items contained or the subject matter of a particular comment, we put those into qualitative. So this is the numbers. Qualitative is the subject, and anything that's more qualitative we put into those other headings. So just want to get that to the board.
Thanks for that clarification. So any particular items with regard to any quantitative items, not just related to the number and hours of CE or CPD, but of other items that board members want to raise? All right, seeing none, I think then without objection from folks, and if you do, always feel free to unmute yourself, that we are rejecting these comments for the reasons that the hours that the numbers identified in the regs reflect the board's intent and mission with regard to the CPD units. With these CPD regs. All right, moving on to modify allowable hours for a category. Any comments here?
Yeah, I think this isn't true. You can just do 2 categories and get your 36 hours. So I think we say in the regs that you have to get 2 or more categories. But I mean, you could get, in theory, actually, you could get 36 hours just from your ABAP certification. Not that many people are going to get ABAP certifications, but with that exception, I think you need to be in 2 or more categories. That is our intention, but you could get a lot of hours in academic, and then a little bit in CE. So I don't think we need to modify the allowable hours.
So we're rejecting, so seeing no board comments on this, we're rejecting this comment on the grounds of factual basis. Is that right, Dr. Phillips? So,
sounds good to me.
All right, extend implementation date. We've accepted these comments. Thank you, Dr. Harbsheet, for bringing them to the front of our conversation early on. So with regard to the extension of the implementation date, the board has accepted these comments with an extension to 2022, with the implementation date of 2022. I don't see any further comments from the board. So we're going to hit allow implementation via electronic means. I believe this is in reference to some of the conversations we've had with regard to virtual attendance. And the board has accepted some of these with regard to the conference and not others. So with this, I think for its purposes, we will say we've accepted within the context of the virtual attendance. Unless Mr. Jackson or Jason or Mr. Gosby will indicate to me that that interpretation is incorrect. The next category is cultural diversity and social justice requirement. These comments reflect either one, that it's too excessive every year. Other comments are asking for the addition of ethical, legal, moral, political factors and perspectives. So I just want to mention here that in terms, I think it is fairly clear that this is separate and apart from the ethical obligation, but Dr. Phillips?
That's correct. It is separate from the ethical obligation. Both of them occur each licensing cycle, which is not every year. So I think we can therefore reject the comment as not actually being accurate description. I don't think there's much disagreement among us as a board that it is important for people to devote themselves to law and ethics. It's also important for people to devote themselves to questions of inclusivity, diversity, and social justice.
Great. Board members, any additional comments on this section? And also, I will point out that while we are moving through these, before obviously the full motion comes into full play, if something does come to mind on something we've covered, we are always able to go back to them. So we want to make sure that folks don't feel like we have prevented them from going back to an item as well. All right, so for the purposes of this, the board is rejecting, for the notation purposes, the board is rejecting these comments as on several grounds. One, that it's not actually reflective of these the facts here before us with regard to the reg language, and that they are separate obligations. Okay, so peer consultation supervision. I'm going to turn to you, Dr. Kusuga. I know you've been waiting for this, so I will turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'm reading the description, and I want to focus on the line that says CPD pursuant to this section may only be obtained through individual or group case consultation, reading groups, or research groups. And I think that that's clear enough. So I just wanted to follow up with Dr. Winkleman on why this is considered ambiguous. Also, I just wanted to point it out that some of the things that were brought up yesterday regarding ongoing versus as-needed basis, I think it's covered here because like an individual case consultation would count as peer consultation. There's no requirement for ongoing. So I just wanted to see where we can make improvements, because I think that as I see it, the language is reflecting some of those things that were raised yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kusuga. And this is a good time then. I'm going to ask that Madam Moderator, could you please open the public comment section with regard to the items we've just covered? So for public comment, we're asking for input in relation to the categories that we've just covered here. And that would be for items starting with quantitative CPD issues to the peer consultation services issue. And I suspect actually that Dr. Winkleman will have a comment given the previous comment on peer consultation services. So if you want to make public comment, please feel free to adhere to the instructions displayed before you. Yay, Dr. Winkleman. So can we please unmute Dr. Winkleman's line for public comment? I saw her come in.
It's Dr. Elizabeth Winkleman again. I'm fine with leaving the language as is, and if people, have questions, that's okay. We'll point to the actual language, or they can contact their board staff.
Thank you, Dr. Winkleman. Dr. Jolinda Crow?
Hi, yes. I just wanted to clarify one thing that Dr. Phillips, I think you referenced, and I don't mean to go back, but I think you said that the intent was to have people do something from more than 2 categories, but actually the language says, with the exception of 100% ABAP board certification, the licensee shall accrue hours during each renewal period from at least 2 of the 4. So at least 2. It doesn't change anything that you have here, but I just wanted to clarify that for everyone.
Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, Dr. Jolinda Crow. All right, seeing no further public comment on this item, we will close this one out. Oh, sorry, Dr. Jolinda Crow has one more comment.
I forgot one thing. I think there was a question, maybe more than one, about whether or not consultation could be paid or non-paid. And if the language right now is silent on that, if the board intends to leave that, then is it safe to assume that you intended for consultation to be allowed, whether it's paid or non-paid? So sometimes people do get paid for doing consultation with colleagues.
There are situations where people get paid. There are situations where, for instance, in peer consultation groups, those are typically not paid. Mm-hmm. We don't care if it's paid for or not.
Okay, great. And then also, is there a need? A couple of people, I think, at least with us, asked, is it clear enough that this means that if you were either giving consultation or receiving consultation? So it's an either or?
That's a good question.
I think it should be either or, because I think that the discussion, I think it's more focused on the interaction and the discussion about, and I feel like that's like a learning opportunity both ways.
Right.
The same way for people that are like presenting in CE gets credit for it.
Right, because that's right. You have credit for teaching or taking. Could you just do something simple like saying providing or receiving? Something like that?
I hate to do this again, but Solid, could you please ask Mr. Glassbeagle to pull up the, or transfer authority to Mr. Glassbeagle to be able to pull up that language so we can see that?
I don't really see peer consultation as directional.
Typically, it's not directional.
Yeah.
Okay. Engaging in something.
Let's look at the language.
Because I think the reality in when you do have, say, even an informal peer consultation group, you're engaging in it. You're not providing only. You're not asking for consultation. It's a back and forth. And as Dr. Kasuga said, we do give continuing education credit for teaching a course. So I think it would be good to say engaging in peer consultation.
So you could just put it in where it says peer consultation means engaging in structured and just leave the rest as it is. That would be helpful, I think.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jolinda Crow. So, Madam Moderator, turn off the public comment section, and we will, of course, reopen it as we move forward through again. And meanwhile, Mr. Gosby is updating the language so that we can see it here. And thank you for asking that question, Dr. Jolinda Crow. All right. Any board members, Dr. Hartsheet?
Oh, I'm sorry. I just left it open. Sorry.
No worries. All right. Any board members for further discussion on this chunk of comments? All righty. I'm seeing none. We're going to go to against any changes. I think it's fair to say that the board is objecting to and not accepting these comments because these changes are a reflection of what we see as important to the competency of our licensees. And unless Dr. Phillips has more colorful language with regard to that, I think we can leave it at that against not accepting these comments.
As the day goes on, my color gets drained out of the world.
All right, so we're, without objection, we're rejecting the comments with regard to against any changes for the reasons that Dr. Phillips and Dr. Horn and Dr. Gallardo addressed yesterday in their presentation to the board. Forms of learning. So, we have a question here as whether or not, with regard to the forms of learning, it's going to be applicable to CPA's newsletter as self-directed learning. And so I would just like to ask staff if we can have an answer to that.
I'm going to look up the initial statement of reasons. It's a good reference document to kind of expand on what we wrote in the text. So if you can give me 1 minute, I'll pull that up and see if I can get a little more clarification.
Great, thank you.
And could we see the self-directed learning definition on the screen, please?
So Mr. Gosby will pull up the self-directed learning. Dr. Hartsheet?
Well, I think it's beyond even the CPA publication. Many of us earn credits from other professional organizations, and you see this in the Medical Association too. And so they are actually one of our approved sponsors. So I just wanted to say that it's a bigger issue than just CPA's publication.
One could, I actually would be really curious. Like, one could argue that reading the Board of Psychology's newsletter could be a form of self-directed learning, given the updates on legislation that we provide, as well as any other rules.
I think the intention here was for people to apply themselves more to psychological science or psychology-related subjects. I don't think either our newsletter or, with all due respect, CPA's journal, the California Psychologists, would be considered a peer-reviewed journal. So it's kind of stretching things. I mean, I could read the subreddit on psychotherapy and say that. I think at some point we have to trust that people are going to actually engage in some serious learning activity. Not that we can't learn from those publications, but we hope they aspire to more.
Okay, I have the initial statement of reasons pulled up, and the initial statement of reasons is the document that really explains the why for all the changes. And under self-directed learning, it says it defines self-directed learning as another allowable academic activity and describes it as independent educational activities such as reading books or peer-reviewed journal articles, listening to podcasts, watching videos and webcasts, attending a webinar that is not sponsored, approved for CE credit, taking academic coursework provided by institutions that do not meet the requirements in Section 1397.60B1, or conference convention attendance that does not meet the requirements of 1397.60A4. This will allow psychologists to receive credit for learning activities that deepen or broaden their knowledge or skills in specific areas of practice, making this appropriate to include for CPD acceptance. I don't know if that helps. I just wanted to add that as kind of clarification.
So I hear listening to podcasts, and podcasts are not necessarily peer-reviewed. So it would seem like CPA publication, I mean, when you give credit to, say, the CPA publication, it's not just for looking at the advertisements, it's only for specific focused articles. That would be the same with the National Register publication. And so I don't see that as any less than listening to a podcast.
This is a very free-form category. We are hoping that what people are going to do with the category is to pick a particular subject or a particular interest area. And it may be that an excellent article is going to be in the CPA, California Psychologist, or it might be in the National Register's magazine. But to actually look at multiple sources, but however they want to do that, they want to do it. So this is a slightly more free-form category. It was done to give licensees more flexibility in complying because we've been accused of being such tight blanks. We'll just have to depend on the goodwill and the best intentions of our licensees. If they want more specificity, then we become micromanagers. So however they want to approach this, they can, but we hope that they take advantage of the opportunity to learn something that's going to help them in terms of their knowledge and their applied skills.
And you say your language gets less colorful as we move through the day, Dr. Phillips. So I think the answer to our questions here with regard to forms of learning is that we're really trusting our licensees to, where they're learning and with regard to what Ms. Sorek shared, that could appear in the CPA journal, in the newsletter, or it may not, and we're going to defer to them to live up to that spirit of the guidance. So, though I suspect there'll be questions about whether or not we can clarify in our FAQs on what this counts as. So, any other comments, board members?
I would just add, based on what you just said, Mr. Fu, that if, for example, CPA or even National Register is an approved provider, and if they, a CE, and they determine that read these several articles and you will get one unit of credit, then why would that not fit? That's my logic.
Mr. Fu, I also wanted to highlight what Ms. Sorek read, and on the description of self-directed learning, that it talks about independent educational activities focused on maintaining, developing, or increasing conceptual and applied competencies relevant to psychological practice. And in that regard, those articles that are psychological articles from, the Monitor and the CPA is informational on those specific areas too, like the relevant information for psychological practice.
I withdraw any comment that makes it sound like I was disparaging those as sources of information. I don't think reading a whole bunch of articles in a whole bunch of random journals that are unrelated to each other are necessarily going to rise to the level of something. But, I mean, for instance, the American Psychologists or the CPA, the California Psychologists, as far as that goes, sometimes do issues on a particular subject, and that may be what draws that person into looking further into that area. So I don't want to imply that in any way there aren't a variety of different things you could look at for purposes of pursuing this objective. So I don't think we have to worry about it too much. I think it may be an appropriate time to move on. unless there's more substantive comments on it, but I'll leave that to Mr. President.
I take the hint, Dr. Phillips, and we'll consider these comments rejected in the sense that while the comments are helpful for us with regard to future potential guidance, that the answers and the comments themselves are answered in the regulation here, the proposed regulation here with regard to self-directed learning. And we're not adding more units or credits to the SDL requirement. So part-time practice, any comments here on part-time practice? I think one would argue that we are rejecting this comment because during that part-time practice, the person is still engaging in the profession, and we want to make sure that the competencies are reflected there. But Dr. Phillips?
Exactly right. I mean, we can choose to engage in part-time practice, but that doesn't mean we have to lessen our efforts to remain competent to practice. I don't think we want a part-time surgeon that didn't try to keep us up to date in the field as a full-time surgeon. So, I don't think it's inequitable to require that all of our licensees, should they wish to remain licensed, comply with this particular 36 hours of CPD.
All right. Ms. Nystrom?
Hi, this is Julie Nystrom, and I just wanted to say on that as well, that there's nothing that says that a practitioner couldn't then go and be a full-time practitioner, right? So by doing part-time work, it doesn't mean you can switch over, and the board would have a hard time, monitoring that. So I agree.
Thank you, Ms. Nystrom. Okay, so we'll consider that comment rejected for all the reasons that Dr. Phillips and Ms. Nystrom articulated. The next one agrees with CPA. I believe we've accepted and rejected depending on the topic, but want to take note that we really appreciate the comments from CPA with regard to these regs, and we've taken appropriate responses and separated out each of the CPA items into these larger subcategories. And then agrees with Dr. Shore, again, in similar fashion, our thanks and appreciation to Dr. Shore for her comments and the individual items with regard that Dr. Shore has brought up have been separated out into these larger categories that we've been discussing through. Support CPD, the board accepts these comments and we appreciate the support. I breezed through three items fairly quickly. I don't see any unmuted mics, so I'm going to keep on going to the mandated requirements for CPD. The board, I suspect, will be rejecting these comments with regard to being against the mandated requirements because of the belief that these requirements are actually reflective of the desire to have a competent licensee. So those comments would be the reasons for rejection. So any comments from the board members on this front? All right, so seeing none, I'm gonna ask that we open up public comment section again for the public to provide some feedback here on what we've just gone through. And so we're off to the races. Dr. Jo Linda Crow.
Yes, I just wanted to go back just for a second and offer some clarification on your discussion, your lengthy discussion about the CPA magazine and so forth. I think Ms. Sorick alluded to the statement of reasons with a phrase that I think is important, and Dr. Harpsheets did as well. It may be more a function of how the credit for something like a magazine is offered. We offer credits for reading our magazine, and we are allowed to do that because we are approved by the American Psychological Association to offer what they call home study. We consider that sponsored CE because we are offering CE credits for that. These other things like podcasts and reading the journal on your own, that kind of thing, I think that there was language in the statement of reasons that the self-directed study would be for things mostly that there is no formal CE credit offered for. So I just wanted to offer that clarification. So as far as our magazine goes, we consider it part of our CE program, and we offer 12 free CE credits for our members per year for reading the magazine, but it's a very formalized process where we have beta tested how long it takes to complete it to determine for APA's purposes how many credits can be awarded. There's an online post test that readers must complete before they earn the credit. So it is distinct in that way from listening to a podcast on your own, and I just wanted to offer that clarification.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jo Lindecrow, for that clarification. All right, seeing no further comments for what we've covered items so far.
Mr. Fu, I just wanted to say something. I wanted to ask Dr. Lindecrow if, with that clarification, are you suggesting that the credits for reading the articles in the CPA magazine would fit under sponsored continuing education and not under self-directed learning? Or are you suggesting it would be for both?
Well, I would argue that it's under sponsored continuing education. Whether the board wants to allow someone the flexibility of using it in the other category, I don't know. But in my mind, at least, and when we have discussed it before, I think I do see it as separate because it's a more formalized CE, and people get they get a CE certificate for reading each issue of the magazine. So they read an issue, they go online, they take a test, they pass the test at the required criterion, and then they get a CE certificate from us that is CE credit that we are allowed to give because we are approved by APA. So it's a much more formal process than listening to a podcast, for example, or reading a book on your own and then saying, I read this book. So I do see it as distinct.
Thank you. So I guess that's the question that would we as a board answer that, how we would want to clarify that, or what category, or is that something board staff would look at? I'm not sure.
The regs make it clear you can count that in the continuing education category, assuming you went through all the steps that Dr. Lindecrow had indicated, or you could use that as part of your self-study, but you cannot count it in both categories. So the regs are very clear about that. So there's no double counting, except as it relates to fulfilling the requirements for 4 hours in social justice and diversity, and in terms of your law and ethics, those could be hours you're using toward those ends. Those aren't separate categories. They're just requirements within the context of CPD. So there's no double counting of hours, if that's what you're asking.
Oh, yeah, I wasn't asking about double counting.
But I think somebody could use that magazine either way, as long as they only kept it in the one category or the other.
Okay, that was what I was asking. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Dr. McCall?
Yes, hello again. I think that was kind of what I was talking about yesterday, with the idea of there are some things that might go into two categories. So according to, what I heard from Dr. Phillips there, I mean, it sounds like potentially if someone had gotten their 27 hours in a conference or, some CEUs, they would still be able to use the CPA publication in order to be able to put that into another category and to be able to get hours. And that may be a really great one for guidance to use, since I imagine many California psychologists will be using the magazine. But, you know, another example could be some conferences that, you know, one may attend that might not actually give CEUs, that one might be able to attend, you know, a CPA conference that provides, you know, 22 CEUs, plus, you know, attend, you know, a conference that doesn't necessarily give CEUs, but still be able to get extra or fulfill in that category with that. So I think that being able to clarify some of these things, even like, you know, the CPA convention, APA convention, where they can straddle a couple of different categories, that some of those can be used as overage to go into other categories if they do fall into two, or whether it's like, look, you know, if you're doing, doesn't matter what you do, if you're doing stuff that gets you CEUs, you're capped at 27 periods. That can't count another category. That can't count in another category. I think, you know, would be useful to clarify for licensees. That's all.
Thank you, Dr. McCall.
Mr. Fu?
Yes.
I would like to make just one clarification just for everyone on the webcast here, the Webex. If the intention is, if a licensee goes to a convention, that convention offers continuing education, attending the conference or convention and obtaining the continuing education is totally acceptable, because they are two completely different buckets and you're not using one thing to count for two different things. You're attending CEs and then you're also attending the conference as almost, it's two separate things and totally acceptable under this package.
Thank you, Mr. Goss-Eagle, for that clarification. So I'm going to ask that our colleague DeSolid go ahead and close out the public comment section, and we will go through this last tranche of comments, of the comments with regard to the regs, not the public comments. So I'm pulling it back up with regard to it. So the next item would be under law and ethics. Any board members here who would like to discuss? So I think we've discussed already that the ethics training and cultural diversity and social justice trainings are two separate categories. So we'll clarify that. And the second question is to ask the Board of Psychology to ask CPA to make a laws and ethics training. So
I would just add that CPA does offer various law and ethics trainings throughout the year. So I don't think that's not particularly a concern for psychologists.
Speaking from our former chair of the ethics committee for CPA, thank you, Dr. Harpsheets.
Thank you.
So, all right, so the board without objection will reject these comments for the reasons stated that with regard to the law and ethics section. Personal exception situations. Someone has asked for no exceptions for personal or external crisis. Oh, excuse me. Other comments have been about the proposal doesn't consider the current pandemic. And is there an appropriate time is this the appropriate time to be adding additional stress? You know, I think it's fair to say that what we're doing here is providing additional options to complete your CPD. So those additional options are meant to reduce stress in terms of seeking these things. And with the implementation date that we've now included into December 2022, I think for all of us here, we hope we will be at the end of this pandemic by the end of 2022. And that the consideration for teleworking, again, we've made that exception to include the virtual attendance of conferences, for example, in light of that. So without objection, I would say that the board is rejecting these comments based on those reasons articulated that we've made attempts to address all these points here. Any comments from board members? All right, seeing none. The last piece here is around BOP operations. These are, I don't think, are in relation to the regs. They are rather to how the board conducts meetings, and certainly we take them under advisement with regard to expected start and stop times of meetings, which we already do with our agendas. And to the extent possible, we do try to do the start and stop times with regard to closed session, as we've done today and yesterday, in articulating that. So, it's fair to say we're rejecting these comments because they aren't relational to the regs in terms of what we're asking psychologists to do, but more on the operations side. Any other board comments on these regs, on the BOP operations side, board staff?
Not here.
All right. So what I'm going to do is, before I turn to public comment for this last tranche, I'm actually going to ask if folks, board members, have any final comments on what we've covered through these comments. And if not, what I would then ask, I think, Mr. Jackson, what we're going to do here is that you would ask for a motion to adopt, a motion to accept the board's review of the CPD comments. Is that correct?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yeah, what we'd want would be the board to accept the comments at this time, not per se approving them, just to accept the comments as received, and then staff will need to create the responses so the board can provide the responses, the specific wording.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. And Ms. Marks, I see you're also unmuted.
Yes, I wasn't sure who you wanted to respond. I'm not sure. Did you say you were going to have one last round of public comment?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to hope for a motion and then take more public comment with regard to...
on the motion. Okay. Mr. Jackson can assist here, but I think the motion would be to approve the modified text for a 15-day public comment period, and accept and reject the comments as laid out by board staff and for the reasons stated during your conversation. I believe that's what you'd be doing. And then you can do a separate motion to delegate to the executive officer to adopt the modified text in the absence of any negative comments. Okay, so we might have you repeat, Ms. Marks, for that second motion, but just for clarification, the language here is to accept the modified text for a 15-day notice and to accept and reject the comments, public comments submitted during, sorry, can you repeat that again? Yeah, I don't think, Mr. Jackson can correct me if he has done it differently. I'm not used to doing a motion specifically, a separate motion specifically to accept or reject comments. I think what you'd be doing is a motion to approve the modified text for a 15-day public comment period.
Oh, okay.
You can indicate in the final statement of reasons that the modifications are based on the accepting or rejecting the public comments as laid out in the discussion, and then the final statement of reasons would set out those reasons in there for each of the category of comments. So we can start there and then do a separate motion to delegate to the executive officer. We can see how the first motion turns out. But if Mr. Jackson has a different practice with respect to a motion to accept or reject the comments, then go for it.
And I'm fine with that, Noreen. Thank you.
Excellent. All right, so do we have a motion then to accept the modified text for 15-day public comment?
I move.
Second.
It's been moved by Dr. Hogsheets and seconded by Dr. Tate. And so I'm going to now ask for public comment on the motion as well as the remainder of the items that we covered. Dr. Jo Linda Crow.
I feel I would be remiss in not congratulating the board on coming to the end of this very long road. These have been around for a while, and I'm sure that you share my my observation that it's really good to see that they're finally coming to fruition. If we're going to make this change, I do think that many of the changes that have been made along the way have been really excellent, and I appreciate the board's considering our comments and making some of these changes that I think will they've improved the document and will make it more clear to your licensees. So thank you very much, and congratulations for getting to this point.
Thank you, Dr. Jo Linda Crow.
Mr. Fu, I hate to interrupt, but Mr. Glassbeagle just pointed something out, which was a really good point, and something just consistent with all of our regulatory packages. And I'm not sure if this is something that's technical and non-substantive, so would be incorporated in the motion. But one of the changes that was suggested by CPA, which is in conformance with our other regulatory and statutory changes that we have made, is gender neutral language. So anywhere where we say he or she, refer to that person as a licensee or what have you, to make it more general language. I don't know if we need to withdraw the motion to do that or if that's something the board would want to consider, but that could be just a universal change we could make in the language. And I'm looking to you, Mr. Fu, for guidance on that, and Mr. Jackson as well on procedurally how we might be able to address that.
Mr. Jackson, my sense that that would be a non-substantive change that we can delegate to the executive officer, but you are the one with the letters behind your name, specifically JD. So.
Okay. It's always safer to withdraw and just change the motion, include that, and then go from there, so that it's not an issue in the future that we have to deal with.
All righty then. Okay, thank you, Mr. Jackson. So, Dr. Harpsheets, will you withdraw the motion?
Yes, I will withdraw the motion.
All right, and Dr. Tate is going along with that withdrawal, I'm assuming?
Yes.
All right, so the motion, so we're going to do for the modified text is one, put in there a universal change to gender neutral language. And actually, this reminds me, Dr. Winkleman brought up the reference of the code not referencing the right part. And did we get an answer back on that? So we can add that here as well?
So, Ron, those are in the old regs.
Oh, okay.
Right. I think I looked at it in at least the page that was up on the screen with the old regs that I believe were in effect prior to the change to 2915. So it may have been correct when we went through the other large change to the CE regs, but that was before the change to 2015 and the language with continuing professional development. So while it may be wrong, I don't know that you would be able to correct it now, except by doing a completely separate package, because this package won't be effective until January 1, 2022, at which point this particular section will go away. So you'd have to do I believe you'd have to do either another completely different regulation or make this one kind of a two-parter. I'm not quite sure you want to go through that. But Dr. Winkleman can, maybe indicate, maybe this is where you're talking about. You're talking about the I'm seeing it up on the screen now. So you're not talking about the new language. I mean, the old language. You are talking about the new language. Is that what you're talking about, Dr. Winkleman?
Yes, I'm talking about the new language referencing right there, 20.
Okay.
Okay. I believe it should be G. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Let me take let me, Mr. Jenkins, take a look at that. I'm sorry, what was up on the screen prior to this was the old language.
Dr. Winkleman, can you rephrase the section you had indicated to change it to G?
I think she said it was G.
Yes, it was G. G as in Greg. Or Geraldine.
Or Grumpy.
That wouldn't be a reference, of course, to Dr. Phillips' state of being at this point, would it?
Oh my God, no, I'm always so cheerful.
All right, so we made that change. What I'm going to say is, okay, so we're going to do this for the modified text. The motion will be to accept the modified text, inclusive of gender-neutral terms and references to, and updating references to statute for 15-day public comment. How does that language sound for the motion?
Yes, I agree.
Great. So we have, it's been moved by Dr. Harpsheet. I'm assuming Dr. Tate is eagerly seconding as well.
I'm right there with the second.
All right, so we'll turn back to public comment. Dr. McCall is joining us in his humor. Dr. McCall, is that a wish for public comment or? Okay, so Dr. McCall has declined public comment. We will take Dr. Jo Linder-Crow's congratulations from the previous time as well, and appreciate the ongoing work that all the stakeholders have provided us. I remember sitting in Southern California as a new board member 3 years ago doing this, and I know others have been doing this for 10 years. So without further public comment, we're going to close the public comment section, and we are going to, seeing no Dr. Harpsheet, do you have further comments?
No, sorry, I forgot to unmute myself, or to mute myself, sorry.
No worries. All right, so seeing no further board comment on this item, I'm going to ask that Ms. McCochran take the roll.
Okay. Cervantes, I'm sorry.
Oh, Ms. Cervantes is here.
Oh, okay. Kasuga?
Aye.
Cervantes?
Aye.
Fu?
Aye.
Harpsheet?
Aye.
Nystrom?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Rogers?
Aye.
Tate?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. And I, just not to belabor the point, but really also want to express our thanks to the previous board members who've worked with us over the last decade. So our gratitude also to Dr. Horn and Dr. Gallardo yesterday for joining us and reliving this moment. And of course, Dr. Phillips' veteran status with regard to this. So I'm going to suggest that the board take a 10-minute recess to, because we've been sitting for a long time going through all of this. So I'm going to suggest we'll come back at 2:30 to take up items.
Mr. Fu?
Oh, sorry, we have to delegate to the executive.
Yes.
Sorry about that.
If we could have a separate motion to delegate to the executive officer to adopt the modified text in the absence of any negative comments, and to complete the rulemaking file, making any technical changes as necessary for the control agencies to complete the package.
So moved.
Moved by Dr. Kasuga.
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Tate. Any board discussion on the motion to delegate to the executive officer? All right, seeing none, could Madam Moderator, could you please open the public comment section? All right, if you have any, if you wish to make public comment, All right, seeing no public comment, we're going to close the section. And seeing no further board discussion, we're going to ask Ms. McCochran to take the roll for the motion before us with regard to delegation to executive officer.
Okay. Kasuga?
Aye.
Cervantes?
Aye.
Fu?
Aye.
Herb Sheets?
Aye.
Nystrom?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Rescate?
Aye.
Rogers?
Aye.
Tate?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you so much. All right, yay. Thank you, and also thank you to our fantastic staff, Mr. Glasspiegel, and our councils, Mr. Jackson, Ms. Marks, and Mr. McGuire for getting us through this as well. All right, so the board will be in recess for 10 minutes. We'll return back at 2:30 to continue with our agenda items.